Hello, my friends. Lori Ashcraft here again. I'm your host for Viva Evolution, sponsored by Recovery and Resilience Solutions, which is a training and consulting branch of Crestwood Behavioral Health. I'm so happy to be back here with you today. And today we have an amazing guest in the person of Ron Manderscheid, a person that I have admired I said to him, I've admired you not just for years, but for decades. Ron and I are close to the same age, so we've both been around a really long time. And he does just a brilliant job of tracing the roots of the peer movement on one level, on kind of a government level. And he has been a champion for peer support long before people even called it peer support. And has had an incredible influence on the evolution of the peer support movement and continues to be one of our strongest supporters. And you'll hear in the interview, listen for this, listen for the span of influence he's had and how he was able to stick to what he knew was right in the face of a lot of opposition. Any of us in the peer movement have had to do that because it wasn't necessarily a movement recognized for its beauty and importance and significance early on. And still today, we suffer a little bit from, I'm going to call it discrimination. I don't know if that's the best word, but anyway. So I know you'll enjoy this. Excuse me. Yeah. Okay, let's just get on with it and see what Ron has to say. Okay, Ron, thank you so much for being willing to join us today and share your wisdom and your immense experience with us. I've just been so excited about sharing you with my viewers. So thanks.
And thank you for inviting me. I'm always delighted to work with you and delighted to see that you're continuing to do this very important work. And when you're passionate about things, you continue and you do it, and you're pleased with what you're doing, and you're happy that you're doing it.
Yes.
So you and I are very similar in that regard.
Yes.
I'm very passionate about it. So in that sense, I never worked a day in my life because I always loved what I was doing. And I know that's true of you as well.
Yes, yeah. Well, I just want to say before we go any further, I have admired your work. And I was thinking how long? I'm going to say it's not just years, it's decades. So that's probably because we're both very old.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is just great. Well, I was thinking today, the area of your work where I've had the most intersection has been in the area of peers. And you were one of the very earliest supporters of the peer movement, long before anybody else saw any potential in it. Can you just talk a little bit about that, what you saw?
Yes, I would love to. So to give you a little bit of background, let me first put my own career in a little bit of context. So if you asked me about my career, I would say in my career, I went literally from the bench to the trench. So when I first came to NIMH, I started as a graduate student, and I worked in the labs of the National Institute of Mental Health as a graduate student on the brain catecholamines and how the brain catecholamines relate to stress and so on. Over time, I went on to become an employee, to manage NIMH programs. And about halfway through my career, I said, I have to spend more time in the field listening to what people have to say about behavioral health and their own issues. So mid-course, I started listening to people's first-person accounts of their own experience. I said, oh my goodness, this is information that's absolutely critical for us in NIMH who operate programs. It's absolutely critical for providers and managers of programs in the field, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's really kind of what started me on this work. And so I started inviting peers to come. I used to host a large 500-person national meeting every year. So I started inviting peers to come and give plenary presentations at those meetings to talk about their own experiences, to talk about how they were treated by the system, to talk about their own recovery and their recovery journey and so on. Those were wonderful, wonderful sessions. We then moved on from simply inviting people. I said, well, we have to get peers as advisors to NIMH on all of its program areas. So we need peer reviewers, we need peer advisors, we need peer technical reviewers, we need peers on policy groups and so on. So I was I think the very first person in NIMH to do that. So I did it. Initially, I got blowback from other people on the committee saying, why would you ever invite a peer here? We know better. And I said, well, I'm not sure that's the case. I think peers have a lot to tell us because they have actually lived this and you have not. Yes. So that got us going. And over time, it gradually took hold and I got it in more places in NIMH. So if you went back and looked today, I would say there's not a single advisory group in SAMHSA or NIMH or anywhere else in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services that involves behavioral health that does not have peer advisors involved in the project. And part of the proof of that is the new recovery center that was created in SAMHSA just about a year ago now. Yeah. So I'm very proud. If you say, what are the things that in your career you're most proud of? I'm most proud of bringing peers to the table. And I did that and started that by listening to people's stories. Now, another comment about stories here. So the stories that people told were always stories loaded with trauma. They were always stories of hope, you know, moving from a situation of hopelessness and trauma to a situation of hope to an understanding of what I have to do for recovery. What is my recovery journey? How am I progressing on my recovery journey? So that whole cycle became very important to me. I did a lot of writing about that also. I would say beginning about 1990 and after 1990. And I think another thing that came out of that work, not only my work, but many other people's work, including yours, is the idea that trauma is a huge causative factor for all types of behavioral health issues, not just mental illness, substance use, and various forms of IDD as well are caused by trauma. So if we want to change that situation, one of the things we are going to need to do as a society is to reduce the trauma that people are actually exposed to. Yeah. So I think that's another learning that came out of that period that has been very important. And, you know, now there's not a single, I think, treatment program operated by SAMHSA that isn't engaged in trauma-informed care. Yes. Whether it be for adults or children and so on. So a lot of things came out of that original work that was underway in, I would say, the middle 1980s to the beginning years of the 1990s, which is now almost 35 going on 40 years ago, basically. Yeah.
Ron, let me just stop you and ask a few questions. You started doing this. I can't think of any, maybe Lauren Mosier, but not to the extent that you've done it. You were able to see something before anybody else saw it. And you were able to convince people, probably dragging many of them kicking and screaming, but somehow you did that. I'm feeling like we're at a point now in this peer movement where we need a lot more people to stand up and do that kind of thing. Can you say a little bit about what is that part of you that can do that?
Well, I guess it's persistence.
Yeah.
So, and I'm just as passionate about that as I am about, all the work I've done in behavioral health in the sense that, if I become convinced that something is the right thing to do,
Mhm.
this is the right thing to do,
Mhm.
and it can have very positive outcomes for the people engaged in it, why would I not do it? And why would I not persist in doing that?
Yes. Yeah.
So, as I said, when I first started bringing peers as advisors to NIMH, I got tremendous blowback.
I'm sure
Well,
you
one
did.
one one alternative could have been, well, I'm going to fold up my tent and blow away here. I
Yeah,
did not do that.
I know
So
you did.
not only did I invite them year one, but I invited them year two and three, and we learned. We learned that number one, you can't invite only a single peer.
Right. Right.
You can't invite only a single peer. And my goal has always been, and you'll appreciate this, I hope, that we should have parity in all of these groups. So if we have a group of 12 people,
Mhm.
it should have 6 peers in it and 6 other people.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
shouldn't be 10 other people and 2 peers,
Mhm.
basically. I'm always been in favor of moving this toward parity. We have never achieved that, but that remains a major goal of mine and will be as long as I'm alive.
Yeah.
So I think, being persistent and doing this and sticking with it has a lot to do with accomplishing things, especially when you're in the federal government. Sometimes in the federal government, it can take 15 years to accomplish something.
I
So
know.
if you, so if
The
you're
government.
short fuse here and you can't stand it and you can't tolerate it, you'll never stay 15 years on message of pursuing this. So
Mhm.
and once I was on that message, I never deviated from that. And any place I went where I gave talks, and I gave talks at Recovery International in Phoenix and so on, I always talked about the peer movement and the importance of the peer movement. Now, fast forward down to today.
Oh, wait, let me just, I'm just
Okay, go ahead.
kind
Yeah,
of
please.
stuck on this because this is what I think we need so much. Just this part of you needs to come forward and manifest in a whole bunch of other people if we're going to keep going. So what I'm hearing is when you get passionate about something, that that sustains you. But also when you believe in something,
Yes.
you don't let obstacles or discouraging comments interfere. You just talk a little bit about that. How does that work?
Well, so I would say, for me personally, I would describe myself as a fairly resilient person, that
Mhm.
I can experience a hardship and within 2 or 3 days, I will begin recovering from that hardship, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so I have great appreciation of my own parents and my family, my brother and my sister, and my family, and my aunts and uncles and grandparents
Mhm.
for raising me in a way that allowed me to be a resilient person.
Mhm.
So if I fast forward down in time, and I'm very concerned now about the resiliency of Gen Z people.
Mhm.
If I contrast my own type of background with the type of background that I think Gen Z people have,
Mhm.
I think Gen Z people have much less resiliency. So
Mhm.
when they are confronted with a hardship, they tend to fold up in various ways. They do not tend to work through the hardship. And I think the consequence of that is that you have in the Gen Z population a much higher rate of depression, anxiety, all of these things that are due to a person's inability to cope with their environment. And obviously, our environments are getting more and more complex because
Yeah.
they're not only interpersonal environments, they're electronic environments, they're cell phone environments, they're environments, where we've had COVID, where teenagers couldn't talk to their peers, they couldn't be with their peers. A very important part of a teenager is having peers and spending time with them. So if
Yeah.
you're locked in your room at home because of COVID,
Mhm.
you've lost a whole developmental experience, and
Mhm.
so on. So I think it's those types of things have had a negative impact, particularly upon Gen Z people. But for myself, I go back to the idea, I think, I was the context, my social environment and cultural environment were such that I was raised to be a fairly resilient person and fairly optimistic about being able to solve these problems either by myself or reaching out to people and I have this issue. Can you help me work on this issue or whatever it is, basically? So, and I think that's very important that we in the field of behavioral health think about the whole concept of resiliency and in the peer movement and peers being peer supporters in the behavioral health system, are we also concerned with the resiliency of those peers as they confront difficulties in their work environment?
Yeah.
I have a difficult manager, I have a difficult supervisor, I'm not being paid a living wage here, I have too big a caseload, all those kinds of things that can happen to a peer. We need to help them develop resiliency and strategies for coping with those things and actually solving them. So,
Just let me stop again. Sorry, I can't help myself. You're just waking up parts of me that can't be quiet. So we started off talking a little bit about trauma and then focusing on the Gen Z folks who've had a special brand of trauma, all their own, but the rest of us, I mean, we all had ours too, but they've got theirs. And what we know, and you're leading up to this, is how do we turn trauma into post-traumatic growth? There's been a lot written about this. I just love the concept. I do a lot of training on it myself. Turning that, and some people, they can go through a terrible experience and somehow grow through it, become stronger, smarter, have a better strategy. Other people, as you say, fold up.
Yeah.
I don't know how to get to those fold ups in a way that we can turn that into growth.
Well, I think we want to develop coaching and leadership and training procedures to work with people to help them understand how you work through these things. And the classic example here would be, the work that was done in looking at the types of traumatic experiences that children have.
Yeah.
So, and, in the scale that's used with children for traumatic experiences, if a child experiences 4 or more, they're likely to develop a behavioral health issue by the time they're 18 and so on. So then if I look at, again, the Gen Z people right now who are passing 18 and becoming adults and saying, how many of these people were actually exposed to these various types of traumas? And do we actually have various types of role modeling? Do we have various types of coaching, mentoring to help them work through those experiences? And I think historically, we haven't done anything with that.
No, I love the idea of role modeling. That's so powerful.
Role modeling, yes. And I think another thing that came of, not just because of me, but came of my work in NIMH was when, I invited people in and they told their stories and so on. They were not only telling their stories to me, and when I brought them to these meetings, to the other people at these meetings, they were telling their stories to other people who had experienced a very similar trauma. And they would say, oh my, this person had the same experience that I did. And look at what this person is doing. That is role modeling.
Right.
That is role modeling.
If
and
you
they're
can
wonderful.
do it, maybe I can do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important part of education and training of people who've been exposed to trauma to increase their resiliency so they don't, quote, fold up after having been exposed to this. I don't think the total solution is this person needs to go into therapy or this person needs to be put on a drug. I don't believe that.
I don't
In
know.
fact, many people don't need drugs, and many others probably don't need therapy, but they do need support, social support, and they do need role modeling for their problem. And I, in thinking about peer support, I think a huge part of peer support is role modeling for other people that peers are caring for in the system. Going to a little sidebar here, in the last several months, I've been doing a lot of work on the crisis in the behavioral health workforce. And the crisis in the behavioral health workforce has come about because for 40 years, we haven't had any leadership in the field, and we've done absolutely nothing at the national level. So now the chickens have come home to roost, and really forced by COVID to come home to roost. Our problems doubled. We went from a prevalence of about 25% for behavioral health problems in the US to almost 50, but our behavioral health system remained the same. No capacity didn't change. So now we have much more burnout. We haven't engaged enough peers in this, which is where I'm coming to. There's a huge, huge role for peer support in the behavioral health system right now.
Yeah, I think so.
And we need to train a whole cadre of peers to do this work. I don't see that training is being done in any large scale way anywhere in the US. I don't know whether you are aware of it. I'm not aware of it personally. So
California, this might come to a halt over the next couple of years, or even this year, because of some realignment things. But California's been investing quite a bit of money in peer training. And some of it's been very good training, some of it's been lackluster. So there's been training, but there's an issue between training and employment that I see. And I think it comes back to the people who are running programs. I'm going to say counties. I know that you are intimately acquainted with counties.
I did a lot of work with the counties in California when I was the ED at National Association of County Behavioral Health and Developmental Disability Directors. I was their ED for 12 years, and
I remember
California was doing a lot of interesting things. Some of the things they're doing on waivers in California, both on the mental health side and the substance use side, are very interesting. And I agree with you on peers, but again, I don't see a lot of role model training for peers. I see peers being trained to be a support person, help the person get to care, help the person when they go to an emergency room, help the person when they're in jail. That's different than role modeling on trauma, the way we're talking about, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I think if more hiring people, whoever they are, whether they're counties or contract organizations, I think there's a breakdown there. I think what they see is they say, well, peers can't do this work. And I say, thank God. I don't want them to do the work you're doing.
Yeah.
I want them to do a different job. I don't want them to just stand there and do paperwork. I don't want them to do drive-by meetings with people. I want them to get in relationship. And that's the strong point of peers. They know how to do that. They can do that. But that's where I feel that's a stuck point, where we're not putting, the ones that are getting trained, not enough of them are having opportunities to get into action. I don't know what to do about that.
Well, I think, part of this, you might want to also consider not only working with peers and training peers, but you may want to also work with some of the system managers and clinical directors in these programs to show what peers can do. I think people come to a lot of these things with stereotypes.
Yes, they do.
They come with the stereotype, I'm going to hire a social worker, and that social worker is going to work on social care, basically.
Yeah.
Well, that's one thing a social worker can do, but they can do a whole host of other things. The same as peers, but we don't often know the range of things that peers can do. So I think in addition to training peers to do trauma-informed role playing for people, it's very important that we train managers, clinical directors, senior clinicians, and others that play key roles in provider entities and in counties as to what peers actually can do for them. And if you're not using peers that way, you're wasting the peers that you have there, unfortunately.
Yes.
And part of that advocacy has to also be paying peers a living wage.
Yes.
There's huge variability in that in the United States, and I would argue in more than half of the United States, peers are well below a living wage currently, just well below a living wage.
I think we do pretty well with that in California, but I know in other states, it's, and I think, you know, that people think, well, we'll hire peers because they're cheaper. So they hire them for the wrong reason, and then they aren't interested in paying them more.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, until they can support themselves, it's hard to do good work, whether you're a peer or not.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
All of everybody who works in the system should be getting a living wage.
Yes.
Just as a matter of principle, as a matter of social justice, they should be getting a living wage.
Yes. Yes. Well, you know, I'd like to hear from you about opportunities. Like, I think the peer movement has done a pretty good job of capitalizing on some opportunities. And then we've let others slip by. And I'm worried right now that things are slipping by us. Do you think that at all, or is that just me?
I think, I guess the way I would analyze what you're saying and give a little bit different perspective on it, excuse me a second, is that how I would analyze what you're saying and give a little different perspective on it. We may have plateaued.
Okay.
And by plateauing, what I mean is if you go back into the early 90s to the mid 90s to the early 2000s, the peer movement was growing rapidly. I did a strategic plan on behavioral health workforce for SAMHSA in 2004. A major focus of that strategic plan was the future role of peers in behavioral health. So we were climbing at that time. Then I think we kind of plateaued out, which is what I think you're experiencing here.
Yes,
but we plateaued out at an insufficient level for peers in the system. Not only peer supporters working in bigger systems like county systems or private systems, but we also leveled out in terms of peer operated services. You know, I think another huge part of the solution to our behavioral health human resource crisis is peer operated service programs.
I agree.
And I did the first survey of peer operated service programs. I think it was back approximately 1994. And at that time, there were approximately, by my recollection of that data, about 800 peer operated service programs in the US. I have no idea now, 20 years later, how many there are. I don't know whether there are 800, 8,000. I don't know anything about what they're doing and so on. So there's need for us to, if there isn't data available, at least to run some focus groups with some of these people and say, how are you faring? And, how is the environment for this program and so on. And so I think there's work needed there to ferret out what can be done with peer operated service programs. And particularly, and one of my students from Johns Hopkins, Laisha Ostro, who now lives in California, you may have come across her, is a doctorate from Hopkins, pioneered in respite care in California. Peer-operated respite care. Well, that's become a very big thing, and now we're actually getting into a broader-based respite care. There's a huge opportunity for peers here in that arena. So I think not only in traditional peer support in bigger organizations, but also in peer-operated service programs, peer-operated respite, warm lines in the new 988 system, all of this, there are a lot of opportunities coming along. And I think it's very important for people like you and for people like me to talk about these things when we give public talks, so that people are aware there are these opportunities, and we're interested in expanding the capacity of the system by using peers in a much better way than we do today. So we can overcome the plateauing we've come to and continue on up, because we need vastly more peer support and peer work in the behavioral health field.
I remember maybe 15 years ago, you said, or maybe more, because nobody was thinking this big when you said this. You said, I believe that we should have that 30% of our workforce should be peers. That was like, everybody went, oh no, that's not enough. That's the kind of vision that.
Yeah, no, so if you ask me the same question today, I would say perhaps 30% is not enough. No, because of our crisis, 30% is not enough. We underestimated this. And if we are working in our vision for the future here, ultimately, that we're moving toward, let me paint a little picture here, we're moving toward much more self-directed care. We're moving toward much more focus upon recovery and people's personal recovery journeys. We're moving much more toward solving people's social and physical determinants, so they have the supports and the jobs and the housing in the community. We are going to need many more peers to do all of that.
Right.
How are we going to do all of that, basically?
We need that.
Yeah, we absolutely need that. And so I would say, I want to take back the 30% that I want to say. It was an underestimate. It was an underestimate because it actually should be higher. Maybe it should be 40. Maybe I should start talking about 40 or even 50.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's do the parity thing.
Okay. Do the parity thing, which should be 50%. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. But I think you have to partly paint the picture of where the system is going here over time. And if you paint that picture, then it follows there's certain actions that are needed in bringing people to that system who can do these things, training those people, helping them to be trained so they themselves don't become a casualty of the system that they're entering, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's absolutely huge opportunities for, I know you do a lot of training and have always done a lot of training. There's absolutely huge opportunities for people like you to do that type of training right now.
Well, we're still doing it. Kind of, we have, we're working with a team, our team, through Crestwood. And Crestwood has really supported this process. So I appreciate that, because from my perspective, I've been in a zone where I've experienced a lot of resistance. And like you say, I don't know why, other than I believe in it, why I wake up every morning and try it again. Yeah. But because it's what's going to work for us.
Yes, absolutely. And you're passionate about it, and you believe it, and you know it to be true.
Yes.
And you know that this is a social justice way of proceeding with this, and that we absolutely need to do this.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. you're right in thinking and diagnosing me with a plateau syndrome. I feel like our movement is maybe I just need to be more patient. I feel like we need to go faster, harder, stronger, better. And I think part of it is I don't see a lot of leadership behind this.
Well, we need to be training the next generation of leaders in these areas
Yes.
as well. Yeah. And when you think about that, so who are the other leaders that the next generation down? Generation X, Generation Y, who are the leaders in these generations who are going to pick up the call and do work on these types of issues? And are we, again, helping them? Are we mentoring them so that they can become leaders and actually do this? Or are we not? And I think a huge part of going forward here, and again, going back to the problem of the behavioral health workforce, is we're going to have pathways for doing some of these things. So I'm going to be talking at the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine in mid-July about the behavioral health workforce crisis and kind of laying out a few things that I think need to be done. Well, part of what I think needs to be done there is to create some mechanisms, grant mechanisms, to make it possible to do some of this type of work.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, if I look in the bigger picture, there really aren't many grant mechanisms to do this. And so, I'll be happy to share with you and others, the results of that talk and so on. And I just think we have to do this, and people like you and I have to stick with it and push this as much as we possibly can.
Yeah.
As I see, in my solutions to the behavioral health crisis, the peers are a huge part of the solution. And we cannot possibly solve the crisis without embracing peers and embracing these various things that you and I have just been talking about here.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. Thank you for saying that. I think part of what we're up against is it may or may not have anything to do with behavioral health. It's because I think it happens everywhere, is when we don't know where we're going, we go back and do what we used to do. In other words, we come up against not knowing, and instead of pushing through it to a new level of knowing, we go back and keep doing what we used to do because we know how to do it, even though we know it didn't work very well. And I can look now at just the overall behavioral health system. I don't mean to be disparaging, but I don't think it's working that well. I think we're spending a lot of money on things that we used to do. I mean, we've got the old model of case management, the old model of, I'm talking public service now, of therapy. It's old. Instead of looking at, and the people that we're serving don't even know what things were back there when we got trained. They came into a whole different world. They could be open to a new way of being and doing things.
So you're raising another very interesting feature of the workforce crisis. I think part of the solution, again, I will talk about this when I give that talk in mid-July, is we have to transform the trainers. We have to transform the academic educational system that trains people for behavioral health care so that they can do some of the things that we're talking about. And some classic issues here for transformation of training would include things such as people are not trained to work in teams.
No,
people are trained to where they're still pretty much trained in the old Freudian model. You're going to work by yourself and you're going to sit in an office somewhere and so on. That is not the way of the world now. The way
No.
of the world now is teams. You need to
Mhm.
be taught how to work in teams.
Yes.
Another example, you need to be taught about integrated care.
Yes.
How are we going to work better between behavioral health and primary care and social care?
Yes.
And many of the people you and I work with in the public system need all three. Well, they shouldn't be three unrelated, disparate systems. They should be co occurring and functioning together here. There's
Yeah.
a huge need for training in this.
Mhm.
There's a huge need in training to help understand what we were talking about before. How do you work with allied professionals? How do you work with allied professionals like peers? How do you work with allied professionals like community health workers? How do you work with allied professionals like physician assistants, nurse assistants, and so on? Our providers don't get any training on any of that currently.
Uh-uh.
So another part of my advocacy here will be we absolutely have to think that issue through of transformation of training, and we absolutely have to set up grant programs for academic institutions so that they can retool. You know, a
Yeah.
lot of those
Yeah.
institutions are training people the same way they trained them 20, 25 years ago. And
Yeah.
which brings about exactly what you're talking about. We're training people to a world that no longer exists there.
Yes. I'm just thinking of Bill Anthony here. Um, because when Bill and I first started working together, um, he really was my mentor. I don't think he learned anything from me, but I learned a lot from him. And he was pointing out that up until even the early 90s, the textbooks still said that if you had a mental illness, you only got worse. It
Yeah.
was progressive disease. There was no talk of recovery at all. And
Chronic relapsing disease.
yes, and if you happen to say the word recovery in a room full of mental health people, they would think you were talking about alcohol abuse.
Yes, yes,
They
exactly.
wouldn't get that.
Yes, yeah.
So
So to tell you my own experience in the days when I came to NIMH as a graduate student, the common culture and belief in NIMH and in the field was several things. Number one, once you are a client, you are going to be with us forever till the day you die.
and if you happen to escape, we will hunt you down.
And two, you're likely to get worse over time,
Yeah.
that we can't help you become better, etc. So those things were part of the culture of the mental health field in the late 70s and early 80s that you were talking about with Bill Anthony in the probably the middle to late 90s. They
Yeah.
were persisting into the middle and late 90s. And I've always said, and would say to you a part of this today as well, recovery was not brought to this field by the NIMH researchers, by the managers of mental health systems out there, by the chief clinicians. It was brought to the field by primary consumers who were relating their own experience.
Yes.
That's where the concept of recovery came from. And it suffered the same initial problems that I described before of me trying to bring peers onto advisory groups.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why would we listen to that?
Yeah.
That's being told to us by somebody who has mental illness.
Yeah.
We know better about this because we were trained to know better. That type of resistance was there. That has greatly, to good concern here, greatly mitigated over the
Yes.
recent 20 years, but it's still there in a much weakened form. And if you dig far enough, and you dig deep enough, you will find that some of those cultural elements still exist in the behavioral health field today. They
Yeah,
still exist.
they do. Yeah. But thank you for reminding me that we have come a long ways,
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
though,
We have come a long ways.
Yeah.
There's reason not only to say we need to do more, but there's also some reason for optimism. So,
yes, yeah.
Say a couple things here that I want to make sure I cover. One, I was asked to write a paper on the future of behavioral health care. for the 100-year anniversary issue of the American Journal of Orthopsychiatry. And
Oh.
orthopsychiatry is very interesting because it's always started up in the community saying, we need to work in the community to prevent these things from happening in the first place.
Yes.
We
Yeah.
should not be a stage 4 system. We should be a stage 0 system. That's where orthopsychiatry. So I was very happy to write that paper. And so, and you know, I didn't really know what I was going to write as I began writing this, but I kind of developed a design for it and say, well, you know, I have to talk about the past and how the past evolved here over time. So I kind of went back to the beginning of NIMH and I kind of brought it up to the present here.
Oh my
And
God.
some of the major things that happened in that period. But then I went on to say, you know, the future things we're dealing with here kind of fall into two major dimensions. One is kind of a clinical dimension. What are the kind of things that are going to happen in the clinical dimension? We are going to move toward self-directed care. We're going to have many more peers involved in this. We're going to move much more toward personalized medicine where we don't give the same drug to millions of people, but drugs, if needed, will be specifically formulated for an individual, granted that individual's genetic makeup, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, those types of things.
Mm-hmm.
Then I went on and talked about community. They said another whole piece we've ignored for the last 50 years is we have to step out of our clinical role and we have to move into community. There's wonderful work ongoing outside of behavioral health right now on the important role that well-functioning communities can play in preventing behavioral health issues and helping people informally in the community who have behavioral health issues so they might not need formal care. And then you pursue that. So what's going on in communities? And another dimension of that is how can we deal with population health management, you know, identifying the social determinants that particular people have that cause trauma, et cetera. There's huge, huge opportunities coming in these areas. And then I talked about my final piece in the paper was talk, well, what are some of the factors we have to resolve in order to allow this vision to emerge in the next decade or so? And I talk about a whole host of things, but a couple of them that I'll mention here. One is we have to resolve our behavioral health workforce crisis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We have to have a unified theoretical framework, what I'm going to call a biopsychosocial framework of life and living that we can use. We don't have that. We haven't done any biopsychosocial work for, I would say, the last 40 years, basically. The very first entity that I worked in the National Institute of Mental Health when I was a graduate student was the biopsychosocial research section. And we were doing very interesting work across these dimensions. So, you know, how did the brain catecholamines relate to how you evaluate yourself? How did the brain catecholamines relate to how you interact with other people, relating it to psychology and sociology and so on? It was wonderful work. There hasn't been any of that work for the last 40 years. So
I haven't seen anything.
So I'm trying in this paper to create a vision for the future and that, you know, a future that's achievable here if we only seize it and want to do it, basically.
You know what I'd like to see added to that. I love what you just said. I can't wait to read that paper. So hurry up.
You'll be one of the first to get it as soon as it comes out, and I'm expecting it'll come out in September of this year, basically.
Oh, good. Okay. But here's what I would add to that. Here's what I find. I only see this once in a while. And it's so precious when I see it. Is whoever's in charge, and that could be whether you're in charge of a big system or whether you're just, pardon the term, in charge, whether you're just trying to be the leader of a little caseload somewhere, wherever you are on that spectrum. If we could just increase the amount of humility and vulnerability, so we don't go in thinking we have to know everything. We go in as a learning person learning from the people we're serving, learning from each other. I think that's what we're short on.
Yeah, and I would add to what you're saying, increasing the humanity or humanness in our interactions in behavioral health.
Yes.
That they aren't all technical interactions. They aren't all supervisory interactions. They're interhuman interactions, you know. And I think, give you an example of this. I think one of the reasons virtual care did so well in behavioral health care after April 2020, after April 2020, was the fact that in virtual care, a consumer of care is at parity with the provider.
Oh, right. Yes.
The consumer is at parity with the provider. So there are many people who did very much better in behavioral health care once we went to virtual care, where parity was established with the provider.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's exactly an example of what you are talking about, increasing that humanness. If I come to you for care, I don't want, if I go to my primary care physician, I say, well, doctor, I have high blood pressure. What can you do? Well, I don't want a computer telling me, these are all the possible drugs you could have, or these are all the possible side effects of high blood pressure. I want the person to be human to me and interact with me as a human, not as a computer, not as an all-knowing physician. I want them to be more of a peer. And I think self-directed care will move the system rapidly in that direction as it gets established. And I just give tremendous kudos to the Human Services Research Institute in Boston, Cambridge, Mass, that has pioneered wonderful work in self-directed care. And I just saw on Facebook this morning that they are in Europe now with a European group doing the same thing in Europe. So it's wonderful to see that, because I think that will help bring about exactly what you're talking about here.
I think it can help for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Ron, it's just been wonderful talking with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Likewise, totally my pleasure to come and join you today. Wish you the very best in your continued work. I know you're going to do wonderful work. I know you're passionate about your work, and you want to see a much better world in the future for people who have behavioral health conditions.
I do.
So kudos to you.
Thank you.
Okay.
And don't forget to put me on your mailing list.
I'll put you on my mailing list. Take good care here. Okay.
Take care. Well, there you have it. I told you it was going to be amazing. We're going to have Ron back in the fall once his paper is published and once he does that big presentation that he talked about. I can't wait to hear what the reaction is to that. I'm hoping it's very positive, and I think it will be. Partly because Ron is so very highly respected by everyone who knows anything about the whole mental health system. So, okay, see you back here soon. Got some other amazing guests for us. So have a good day and see you soon.